This is Platform Diaries with Shane Williams, who chews the fat with entrepreneurs, startup founders and thought leaders on what it takes to traverse the wall between startup and scale up.
What got you to here won't get you there. It's a saying that rings true at multiple points on the founder's journey. But what happens when the passion for your idea that got you started starts to get in the way of scale? Stick around to find out. You're listening to Platform Diaries and I'm your host, Shane Williams. My guest today is Craig Crowther, CEO of Melbourne-based digital education platform Cahoot Learning. We discuss why it's so important for founders to strike a balance between vision and commerciality, the common mistakes that founders make, and Craig's tips for success. I trust you'll enjoy the interview. So, Craig Crowther, thanks for joining me on Platform Diaries.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So today I want to hit you with a really punchy question, and that is, why do you think it's so important to strike a balance between kind of founder vision and commerciality?
Wow, that's a fantastic question, and one that I hope we're going to be able to dive into in some depth. I think the challenge always, Shane, is that when you are a founder of any business, to become a founder and to establish a business takes a level of vision, a level of passion that kind of gets you out of bed every morning and drives you to do that. And in some ways, that passion that enables you to do that can certainly get you over the start line and give you that energy to get a business off the ground, to get started, to really invest that time, passion and energy that's needed to do that. But I think as a business starts to shape and grow, sometimes the focus on that and on the product itself and on what you're trying to achieve and what you set out to achieve can be a bit of a blinker, potentially, to what's happening in the market or the world around you and where the product or service that you're offering can land best from a client perspective. So I think it's what gets you on the journey isn't necessarily what's going to take you all the way you want to go on the journey. It's a slightly different perspective and a different mindset that you need to adopt at a certain point in that founder's life.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you think about the whole premise of agile software delivery and agile business was intended to be test and learn, get feedback from your market, understand how to manage your product or to take your product in the right direction. I guess there's a potential for founders to get overly invested in their vision. Not necessarily all founders, but I guess there's a trap there for young players, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of it comes down to what that founding motivation is. If the founding motivation for a business, product or service is you've spotted a niche in the market or you spotted an opportunity and you're kind of going after that and that's the drive. But if actually your business is founded on something that has a sort of deeply embedded passion, I guess, something that you believe in, that is kind of core to your belief and your belief system, then it's harder to let that go or to flex it or bend it a little bit when the time comes to be pragmatic than it is if you are purely product focused and market focused from day one, I guess.
No, that makes sense. And so who do you reckon, if you think about like the example of the gold standard, who do you think's doing that well, making that, I guess, juggling that?
There's a number of examples out there. One that always resonates with me is Airbnb. The founders of that business were driven by an absolute need to make money. They couldn't afford to pay their rent. They saw a gap in the market that there was overcapacity for a conference that was taking place and offered some space on their floor in an airbed, basically, at $80 to help them pay their rent that month. They flexed and adapted over the next few months and eventually over time, I guess, listened to the market and saw what the market was doing and their business has changed as a result. From people who might have done long-term lets, suddenly changing to short-term lets, or people who had never thought about investing in property suddenly actually investing in property to let as a business for themselves. So they created a whole new business model and a business way of doing things just from a founder's need rather than a passionate vision-related need, I guess.
So what are some of the common mistakes you think that founders make?
I think one of the most common mistakes that I've observed over a long period of time, I guess, is that you almost become evangelical, that you're so wedded to your vision, to the thought that you've had in establishing your business, that you want to convince everybody that you talk to that yours is the right way of doing something, yours is the right product or the right service. As a result of that, you will get some early adopters and people who really get it, who have the same shared vision or values or get it at an emotional level and will buy into that. And what that does is it reinforces your approach, it reinforces that behavior and encourages you to do more of that. And I think that early adopter bit, you get to a point where you're then talking to the next 80% of your market that are not necessarily emotionally bought in, but your product could solve a problem for them, but they are turned off by the approach or they're turned off, they don't have the same level of passion about it. And as a result, will not necessarily commit to that. And I think that can work both ways. It's one on a client basis that, it can be a bit of a turn-off. And then from a founder's point of view or a business point of view, you become so focused on making it the best it can be, or it being a whole solution rather than part of a solution, you don't necessarily see some of the opportunities that are in front of you. And as a result, that will restrict your growth.
And so do you think perhaps a founder who gets kind of an early, I'm going to call it false positive, and it's not necessarily fair, but, an early indication from market that their vision is right, it could then fall into the trap of, I only look for customers who will buy into my vision rather than I'll look for customers who are right for the market?
Yeah, I absolutely think that that's a real danger. I suppose with any business, that's okay. If that's what you want to do, and depending on what you want from that business, if you're happy at a certain size and scale, where you only want to work with people who get it at the same level as you, that it's fun to do, it's fun to journey with, then there's no problem with that. But if you want to go beyond that and get into a growth phase, I suppose, from startup to scale up, then for sure you have to be willing to work with people who don't necessarily buy in the same way as you do, because there will be a limited number of those people, and finding those people is a challenge in itself.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting one. If you're genuinely scaling this business, with a view to, IPOing or selling out or being acquired at some point, then it's really about, I guess, the investors will be looking for an increasing in your market, I suppose, or rather acquisition in market. And if you're not adapting to the needs of that market, then I guess you could kind of stagnate, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is that moving from the focus of attention, I guess, from, even if you identify a market opportunity, but if the focus is the product or what you're trying to convince everyone that your product is the right one to meet a particular need, that you then step back at some point and start identifying what the market is telling you about what that need is. And that might involve a bit of a tweak or a bit of a change, or 60% or 80% of what you have or could create, but that is solving a problem that exists or providing an opportunity that didn't exist. And I think it's knowing when that time comes, and certainly in those early days, you're going to be migrate towards those people who, you're either going to get a flat no because it's so radical and they don't want to talk to you, or you're going to get such positive feedback, as you rightly say, that it takes you on that journey a bit further and gives you that kind of adrenaline and fuel to keep going. But at some point, you'll hit a brick wall because there's only so many people you can convince, or not convince, as the case may be, because you didn't have to in the first place.
So then what do you think would be kind of your, let's call it 3 tips for success?
One is awareness and recognition. That sounds like a crazy tip, but I think, mentoring for startup founders is just so critically important for me. Having people who can support, whether that's an advisor, whether it's a mentor, whether it's an investor, who can get you to take that step back and give a different perspective, or see an opportunity where you might not want the founder to be distracted from the vision and energy that's helping them drive that product or service forward, but you need someone around them who has that ability to do so on their behalf, who can harness that and point it in the right direction, I guess. So I think, whether if it's not an angel investor, if it's not an investor, then have some sort of mentor or a third party who you trust to be your eyes and ears from a market point of view, even while you're focusing your time and attention on whatever you're developing. Don't be too wedded to a timeline would be one of the things as well. Some things can grow very fast. Some things take 10 or 15 years before they find their place in the market. And I think sometimes early adopters or early founders, you are trying to convince a market that's not necessarily ready for your product. There are products that have failed over the years that were, they came 10 years later, would have been amazing successes, but the market just wasn't quite ready for them. And as a result, they're seen as failures, even though they were just way ahead of their time. And I think that can be wearing for a founder if you're trying to change a whole market and trying to do other things. And I think, that's where the pragmatism comes, that you have to flex and take people with you on that journey rather than try and convert millions of people to your way of thinking. Third tip, I see the answer to question 1, I guess. Having support networks around you who have your back and have eyes and ears on your behalf, I think, is just the most critical, important thing. Because this is, when people found businesses, it's everything for them. Often it's everything for them financially, as well as emotionally, as well as committed-wise. And, the drive and determination to make that a success and to keep going and to try to prove that what you were doing was right can sometimes be the thing that stops you from being the success that you should be and can be. So having others that can support you in that journey and try and keep their eyes and ears open on your behalf is so critically important.
Right. And so if you think back now to what you do today and the organisation you're working with, what's next for Cahoot Learning?
Yeah, I mean, it's the Cahoot Learning is a digital learning business, that's been around for a number of years now. potentially is one of those businesses that was ahead of its time, and there were a lot of people using the platform, using the services that we offer. But COVID has really focused people's attention in on that. The world has grown up 10 years in 18 months from a digital learning perspective. And that in itself has been a learning time for us. That change that was forced on people during the last 18 months wasn't driven by a recognition that digital learning was better than face-to-face. It wasn't driven by anything other than a need, and people pivoted quickly at that time. Some looked for long-term and good solutions. Some looked for short-term solutions, dived into Zoom. But what everyone has done is adjust, adapt, and kind of grow up in this space, I guess. What we as Cahoot have been able to do is to leverage 15 years worth of learning to that point, 8 years as a platform, and bring a solution that's deeply embedded and works well for people. So we brought that in and the market kind of adjusted for us. It gave us a fantastic year of growth and opportunity. But again, it was a learning curve for us. It's about recognizing where the market is, recognizing what's driving people to purchase, and that might not be a recognition that they want to. It was purely a practical thing that meant they needed to. But offering them a better solution and a better product than what else was on the market, what some of those other alternatives were. And now, at this stage, Shane, I guess it's about being pragmatic around what the future looks like. Some people are desperate to get back to face-to-face learning. Some will never want to go back to face-to-face learning and just want a permanent digital solution. And for others, it'll be a hybrid. It'll be where it works and what works best. From a Cahoot perspective, my job as CEO is to recognize where what we do adds value and to recognize those market opportunities, to bring what we have, to try and leverage that, and to continue on our own growth journey in the years ahead. So exciting times for sure.
Indeed. And mate, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to catching you again soon.
Fabulous. Really good to talk to you. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams. To find out about how Shane enables digital businesses to scale, please visit shanewilliams.com.au. Thank you for listening.